The shaft mouth had been boarded over with pine planks that had gone gray as bone over 20 years of sun and snowmelt. Someone had driven iron spikes through the boards at intervals and bent them down with a hammer, the kind of work a man does once and intends to be the last word on a subject. Beside the collar of the shaft, seated on an upended ore bucket and wrapped in a canvas duster despite the August heat, was an old man named Cyrus Boone. He had watched the young woman approach from the ridge road with the expression of someone who had seen a thing done badly before and expected to see it done badly again. She told him what she meant to do. He said, "It is not gold down there, Miss Voss." She looked at the boards. She looked at the bent iron spikes. She said she knew that. "Nobody has been down that shaft in 22 years, he said. "There is a reason for that." She did not ask him what the reason was. She set her satchel on the ground, took out a claw hammer and a small pry bar, and began to work. Cyrus Boone watched her for a long moment. Then he moved the ore bucket 3 feet to the left so that he was no longer directly in her path, and kept watching. Harlan County, Colorado. The summer of 1887. The San Juans in August are a thing the eye does not immediately credit. The mountain faces above the tree line run from iron gray to a deep burnt orange where the ore-bearing rock has been exposed by weather and the patient work of water. And the sky above them in the afternoon hours achieves a blue, so saturated it reads as a kind of pressure on the skull. The valley below the Antler mine had been a supply town for 12 years, long enough to have a church, feed merchant, a post office attached to a dry goods store, and a population of 400 souls who knew one another's business with the familiarity of people who have nowhere else to be. The town was called Sutter Flat, which was neither flat nor near any river associated with that name. But the man who named it had reasons of sentiment that no one had bothered to investigate. The Antler mine itself had produced silver, not gold, in the years between 1861 and 1865, and had been one of the better claims in the county, until the veins sheared and the ore body thinned to nothing at the 300-foot level. The owner, a man named Aldous Pruitt, had ordered the shaft abandoned and the surface workings stripped of anything portable. What remained was a headframe of Douglas fir gone, silver gray, a collapsed ore house whose roof had come down in the winter of 1868, and the main shaft, which was 60 feet deep and had been boarded and spiked by Pruitt's foreman on the last day of November 1865. Pruitt himself had left Sutter Flat that winter and had not returned. He was, according to Cyrus Boone, living in Denver, where he had made a second fortune in land brokerage. May Voss had arrived in Sutter Flat 6 days earlier with a single trunk, a leather tool satchel worn smooth at the corners, and a deed to the Antler mine's surface rights and mineral claims that she had purchased for $68 from a land attorney in Durango. The attorney had laughed, not unkindly, when she paid him. He said the Antler was played out and had been played out for 20 years, and that she would be throwing her money into a hole in the ground. She had said she was aware of that. He said the shaft was condemned. She said she had read the assessment. He said the headframe was probably not safe to rig off of. She said she had brought her own rigging. She was 27 years old. She had dark auburn hair. She wore in a braid pinned close to the back of her head. She was slight and stood a little under 5.5 feet, with the hands of someone who had done close and demanding work since childhood. The joints thickened at the knuckles, the palms showing the specific calluses that come from rope. She wore a cream pioneered dress with a small floral print, practical boots, and over her shoulders a vivid red knitted shawl that her mother had made from yarn brought overland from Ohio, so red it had startled every horse she had passed on the road from Durango. Sutter Flat had noted her arrival. Two men at the feed merchant's porch had watched her trunk being unloaded from the stage wagon. A woman at the dry goods store had asked, politely enough, whether she was meeting family. May had said she was there on business, regarding the antler mine. The woman had nodded, in the careful way of someone who finds a statement unlikely, but has no specific grounds to say so, and had moved on without further questions. Her father had been a mining engineer. Not a miner, which is a different thing, but an engineer, trained in Pennsylvania and apprenticed in the copper country of Upper Michigan before he came west in 1855 with a surveyor's level, a set of calibrated tap hammers, and an understanding of rock formations that the men who owned the mines around him were too proud and too incurious to see. His name was Elias Voss. He had died of a lung complaint in the spring of 1884, 3 years before May arrived in Sutter Flat, and she had been with him to the end, learning from him past the point at which he could physically demonstrate, and into the territory where his teaching was all language and her learning was all imagination. He had taught her to read a shaft the way another man might read a letter. The timbers told you the age of the work and the quality of the contractor. The water seep told you the depth and the geology of the surrounding rock. The smell told you things that no instrument had yet been made to measure. There is what the shaft was, he had told her once, working a condemned prospect in Nevada, that she had asked him to assess, and there is what the shaft held. Those are not always the same thing. She had been 19 then. She had not forgotten. What she had found in Durango before she found the deed was a letter. It had come to her from the estate of a man named Walter Greer, who had been her father's field assistant for 4 years in the 1862nd, and who had died intestate in a rooming house in Pueblo the previous October. The estate amounted to a canvas bag of personal effects and a stack of correspondence tied with jute twine, which a county clerk in Pueblo had thought to forward to the last address in Greer's records, which happened to be the rooming house in Durango, where May had lived for the past 2 years. The clerk had assumed she was a relation. She was not. She had no idea why Greer had her address. The letter was dated November of 1865 and was addressed to Elias Voss. It had never been opened. It was still sealed with a wax circle gone hard and brown, and in the wax was the impression of a coin pressed flat, which had been Greer's habit when he lacked a proper seal. May had held the envelope for a long time before she opened it. It felt wrong to open her father's mail. It felt wronger not to. Greer's handwriting was small and careful, the penmanship of a man who had taught himself to write as an adult and was proud of it. He wrote to Elias Voss that he had been present at the Antler Mine in the second week of November, 1865, when Aldous Pruitt's foreman had come to board the shaft, and that in the course of that work he had witnessed something that he could not account for. He wrote that the foreman had lowered a mule-drawn cage 3 times into the shaft before the boarding, each time bringing it up empty, and that on the 3rd descent 2 men had gone down with it and come back up, carrying between them a flat-sided iron box of the kind used by assay offices to store certified ore samples and record book. He wrote that Pruitt's name was painted on the side of the box, and that the box had been loaded onto a wagon and driven not to Pruitt's office but to the county land office in Sutter Flat, where Pruitt's attorney received it. He wrote that the land office had been recording deed transfers at a high rate that month, and that he had reason to believe the box contained documentation that would explain a series of mineral rights transfers that had stripped the smaller claim holders in the valley of their subsurface rights in the weeks before the mine closed. He wrote that he had not come forward sooner because he was afraid of Pruitt. He wrote that he was telling Elias Voss because Voss was the only man in the county he trusted to know what to do with the information. The letter had missed Elias Voss by 22 years. May had read it twice in her room in Durango, sitting at the table with the single window to her left and the lamp turned low. The letter was 22 years old and had traveled a considerable distance to reach her, through the hands of a dead man's clerk in a county office, and a forwarding address that had not been hers until 2 years ago. And it was addressed to a man who had been dead for 3 years. She thought about that for a time. She thought about the 14 families in the Harlan Valley who had sold their claims in 1865, and the 22 years that had passed since then, in which nobody had known what Greer had seen, and what her father would have known to do with it. She was not a woman who spent long in contemplation when work was available. Then she had folded the letter carefully and put it in the interior pocket of her satchel, behind the leather flap where she kept her father's tap hammers. Then she had gotten up and gone to find a land attorney. The deed transfer records in Sutter Flats County Land Office were a matter of public access. May spent the second and third days after her arrival there, going through the bound ledgers for 1865 with a methodical patience that the county clerk, a young man named Tom Ferris, found unsettling at first. What she found in those ledgers was a pattern of transfer that was not difficult to see once you were looking for it. Between the 4th of October and the 28th of November 1865, 14 separate mineral rights claims in the valley surrounding the Antler Mine had been transferred to Aldous Pruitt, or to a land company incorporated under his name. The consideration listed in each transfer was nominal, ranging between $3 and $12. The dates of transfer clustered in 2 distinct waves. The first ran through October, before the mine closure was announced. The second fell in the first 2 weeks of November, in the days immediately following Pruitt's public announcement that the vein had failed. She recognized the shape of it. Her father had shown her this kind of work before, not in Colorado but in Nevada. A different mine and a different operator, and he had named it for what it was in the plain language he always used. A man who knew the value of a thing before the market did, and who used that foreknowledge to buy what others would sell in panic. The difference was that in Nevada the man had been doing it with public information and legal instruments. What Greer's letter described was something else. If Pruitt had known when the vein actually sheared and had concealed that knowledge to depress the surrounding claims' value before buying them, the transfers were not merely sharp practice. They were fraud, committed at scale and papered over by a land office whose records were still sitting in their original ledgers, undisturbed because no one had thought to look. What May could not establish from the ledgers was whether Pruitt had known or merely guessed, or simply been fortunate in his timing. That was what the box contained, or what she believed it contained. If Greer's reading of the situation had been accurate, if the box had indeed gone to the land office, if 22 years of county record-keeping had not consumed or lost whatever Pruitt had stored there. There were a great many conditional clauses between Greer's letter and the kind of certainty that would hold in front of a county surveyor and a mining claims examiner. She went back to the shaft anyway. If the box had been lowered into the shaft for safekeeping, it was not there. She had established that in the first 2 hours of her investigation, the shaft had been a holding point, not a final destination. Pruitt had used it as a way station. The box had gone into the shaft had been stripped of whatever was useful to strip, and the box had come back out and gone somewhere that looked like a legitimate repository. She was not looking for the box anymore. She was looking for what the box had superseded. Her father had taught her this much about mine shafts. They are not empty after abandonment. The rock face at the bottom of a shaft, if the shaft was sunk through ore-bearing country rock, will have been sampled systematically before abandonment, because a competent engineer does not walk away from a shaft without documenting what the face shows. Her father had called it the farewell assay. It was not always recorded in the company books, particularly if the company had reason to misrepresent the condition of the face at closing. An honest engineer would record it in his personal notes and keep those notes even after the shaft was closed, because his professional reputation required it. But Pruitt had not employed an honest engineer. He had employed a foreman who did what he was told, and a series of contract drillers who were paid by the day and cared nothing for what the face said. What the face said, if May's reading of the county's geological survey records was correct, was that the vein had not sheared. It had narrowed and then reopened in a secondary pocket at a depth consistent with the regional fold pattern that the survey described. Her father had marked this survey himself years before the antler closed, with a penciled note in the margin that she had found among his effects. The note read, in his steady hand, that depth of secondary at Harlan was consistent with the RA formation. Pruitt would know. If the ore body was still producing at depth, the mine had not been abandoned for lack of silver. It had been abandoned for the appearance of lack of silver, so that the surrounding claims could be acquired cheaply before the secondary pocket was quietly reopened under Pruitt's consolidated ownership. There had not been a reopening as far as she could determine, which meant either that the secondary pocket did not exist, or that Pruitt had intended one and had changed his plans, or that the documentation she needed to establish this was somewhere between the floor of the shaft and the land office, and had never been surfaced. The only way to know what the shaft face actually showed was to go down. If you have never watched a woman rig a descent into an abandoned mine shaft, using improvised equipment on a mountain slope in August heat, you will not easily understand the patience it requires. May had brought a block and tackle system rigged from her own hardware, a 200-foot coil of manila rope that she had tested at the Durango livery stable by hanging a deadweight load off the feedloft beam, and a small carbide lamp of the kind used by surveyors for confined space work. She had brought a canvas descender harness that her father had designed and that she had made from his pattern after his death, adjusting it for her own weight and reach. She had no head frame she could trust. She rigged instead off the old mine car axle that lay rusting in the tailings pile, half buried, its wheels seized solid, which was embedded deeply enough in the decomposed granite that when she applied a test load of 230 pounds by hanging off it at an angle, it did not move. The work of the first day was the rigging alone. She spent the morning testing the axle's purchase in the ground, driving a second stake of iron rod 2 feet behind it as a backup anchor, and lashing both with a double wrap of rope. She sorted her tackle on the tailings pile, laid out in the order she would need each piece, and ran the test load 3 times before she trusted the system. The afternoon she spent clearing the shaft collar, prying up the gray pine boards with the claw hammer, and stacking them to one side. The iron spikes had gone to rust at their tips. 2 of them broke flush with the wood when she worked the pry bar under them, which meant the boards were older than they looked. Beneath the boards, the shaft throat was open to the day, a dark square roughly 4 feet on a side, and the air that came up from it was cold and carried the specific mineral smells she associated with deep country rock, iron and sulfur, and something older underneath, the smell of stone that has not seen light in 20 years. Cyrus Boone watched all of this. He had not left. "What is it you expect to find down there?" he said on the second day when she had finished the rigging and was running a lantern down the shaft on a test drop to assess the air. "Evidence of what the face showed at closing," she said. "In 22 years, he said. "Nobody has been down there. I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My brother held the claim in this valley. Number 7 of the Harlan Group, Southeast Quarter. Pruitt bought it in November of '65 for $4.40. She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the shaft. My brother needed the money, he said. He was not a man who asked questions about a buyer's motives. She said, "What was the claim worth, in your estimate?" My brother thought it was worth $4.40, Cyrus said, because Pruitt's people told him the ore body was dead. He paused. My brother was not an engineer. He had no way of knowing otherwise. She understood. There was an entire valley of men and families who had had no way of knowing otherwise. The descent was not made that day. The afternoon light was moving, and she had a rule from her father about going into confined spaces in diminishing light. One makes all decisions about entry in full light and rested, he had said. A tired body in a dark space is a body making errors it cannot see. She spent the remaining daylight sharpening the tap hammers on a whetstone she carried, labeling the cloth, sample bags in her field notebook, testing the harness buckles one more time under full weight. The harness was canvas and ring steel, built for someone her size, and her father had designed it for exactly this kind of work, the slow, controlled descent into a space of unknown condition. She had used it 9 times in Nevada and twice in Arizona. She had never been afraid going into a shaft. That was not the word for what she felt at the collar of the Antler mine, looking down into the dark, with Cyrus Boone's information about his brother's claim settling into place beside everything else she already knew. If you consider for a moment what patience the next 2 days required, you will have some sense of what the work cost her. The shaft was 60 feet deep and had been sitting sealed since November of 1865. She went down on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of August, with the carbide lamp lit and fixed to a bracket on the left side of the harness, where it would not block her right hand. The walls of the shaft passed her at close distance as she worked down the rope, close enough that she could feel the temperature of the rock dropping 5, 10, 15 feet below the surface, the August heat peeling away in layers until the air at 30 feet was cool enough that her breath was faintly visible. The air was poor but not fatal. Her lantern burned without flickering, which was the test she used. The timbers were deteriorated but not collapsed. Her father had taught her to rap the sets with a hammer and listen for the quality of the knock, a wet sound, meaning rot, through to the core, a dry, resonant knock, meaning sound wood still carrying load. Most of the sets knocked dry. 2, she avoided by pressing close to the opposite wall, moving past them slowly and keeping the rope weight distributed over the solid section. The shaft smelled of iron and cold water and the deep mineral breath of country rock, undisturbed for 2 decades. At the base of the shaft, the water was ankle-deep and cold, seeping in from the surrounding rock at a rate that suggested steady percolation from above, rather than an active underground flow. She did not stop working. The face was visible in the carbide light as a wall of dark gray country rock with a single band of white quartz running through it at an angle, and embedded in that quartz, unmistakable even to a non-technical eye, was the characteristic gray shine of argentiferous galena, silver ore. Running not thin and played out, but wide and consistent across the full width of the face. She spent an hour at the bottom of the shaft. She took samples with the tap hammer, chipping from 5 positions across the face, collecting each chip in a labeled cloth bag that she sealed with a twist of wire. She measured the width of the ore body with a folding rule and recorded the figure in her field notebook. She looked at the drill hole positions in the face and identified from their angles and depths the work of a competent driller who had been documenting what the face showed and had known what it showed. And then she found the paper. It had been left in a cavity in the rock, a natural hollow in the wall beside the face, covered with a flat stone pressed flush. The hollow was dry. The rock above it formed a natural overhang that had kept the seep water from reaching it. Inside was a folded oilskin package, the kind a field engineer uses to protect documents from moisture. Inside the oilskin was a single sheet of paper in her father's handwriting. She held the carbide lamp close and read it. It was a farewell assay, dated the 14th of October 1865, which was 17 days before Pruitt announced the mine's closure. The assay documented the face exactly as she had just documented it herself. Ore body present, argentiferous galena, estimated yield at the secondary pocket, consistent with first phase production, vein not played out but widening with depth. At the bottom of the page, in her father's careful hand, was a single additional sentence in a different ink, written after the technical record had been completed. It stated that this assay had been delivered to A. Pruitt on October 14, 1865, that he had been informed the vein continued and that he had chosen to announce otherwise. The last line read, "I am leaving this copy here because I will not have my name on a false record." She was down there for a long time after that. Not because there was more to do. The work was complete. She had what she had come for, and it was more than she had come expecting to find. She was down there because the handwriting was her father's, and she had not seen his handwriting in 3 years, and the carbide lamp was small, and she was 60 feet under the mountain in August, and the rock was cold against her back. She had known her father's hand since she was old enough to hold a pencil. The precise loops he made on the capital letters, the way he ran the last stroke of the letter N upward rather than down, the habit he had of leaving a slightly wider space before a word he considered important, all of it was on the page in front of her, in the blue-gray light 60 feet below the surface, perfectly legible, perfectly preserved inside the oilskin, perfectly him. Elias Voss. He had been here before her. He had done exactly what she would have done, what he had taught her to do, which was to put the truth in a place where the wrong hands could not reach it and wait for the right hands to arrive. He had not known she would be the ones with the right hands. She had not known that she would be looking. Between his leaving the document and her finding it, 22 years had passed, and 2 people had died who should have known its contents, and a valley's worth of families had accepted payment that was false without knowing it was false. And all of that time, the paper had waited in the dark and the cold, patient as the rock around it. Then she gathered the sample bags and the oilskin and the notebook, and she went back up. Cyrus Boone was still on the ore bucket. He watched her come over the collar of the shaft and stand in the sunlight and breathe. She took the oilskin from her satchel and held it toward him. "My father was the engineer who did the closing assessment," she said. "He left this in the face. He did not reach for it yet." He looked at her face for a moment. "How long ago did he die?" he said. 3 years. He nodded. He reached out and took the oilskin, and he opened it, and he held the paper in the afternoon light and read it. He read it twice. He folded it carefully along the original creases and handed it back. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Above the headframe, the mountain ran up through pine forest into bare rock, and the sky was its impossible August blue, and the air smelled of heated pine pitch and the cold mineral breath rising from the shaft. "That is what the box was for," he said, "not to store things, to move them." He moved his own assay records, she said, so that the official file would show whatever he wanted it to show, and your father left a copy in the only place that was not his to touch. The county mining claims examiner in Sutter Flat was a man named Orrin Webb, who had been in the position for 9 years and was not easily surprised. He was somewhat surprised when May Voss came into his office on the 22nd of August, 1887, and laid before him a filed assay document in the hand of a certified mining engineer, a set of ore samples from the same shaft, and a set of certified copies of land transfer records showing 14 claims transferred at nominal consideration in the month following the assay's date. She had also by then obtained an affidavit from a retired attorney in Pueblo who confirmed that Greer's account of the iron box transfer was consistent with what he had observed from his office window on the relevant day. She had located the attorney through the same county clerk who had forwarded Greer's effects through a chain of correspondence that had taken her most of the 10 days between her descent and her appointment with Webb. She was thorough. Her father had made her thorough. The 10 days between the descent and the appointment with Webb had been a different kind of labor. She had written 7 letters and received answers to 5 of them. She had traveled by hired wagon to the assay office in Ore to have her ore samples weighed and chemically tested by a licensed assayer, and she had waited 2 days in Ore for the results which confirmed the presence of silver sulfide at concentrations consistent with the productive working vein. She had paid for certified copies of the 14D transfer records at the county land office, which required the county clerk to work 2 afternoons transcribing from the bound ledgers, and she had paid him at his regular rate and thanked him plainly. She had obtained a certified copy of her father's original professional license from the Pennsylvania Board of Mining Engineers through a letter to the board's secretary in Philadelphia, which she had sent 10 days before her first day in the land office. The license copy arrived on the 3rd day after the descent, which was the day she had estimated it would arrive. She assembled everything in a single packet, ordered from most to least technical, and tied it with a piece of brown cord. Then she wrote a 1-page letter to Webb summarizing what she had found and requesting an appointment. His reply came the next morning. Webb looked at everything she had put in front of him for a long time. He looked up at her. "This assay is dated October 14, 1865, he said. "Yes." "And the transfer records begin October 17, 3 days later." He looked back at the assay. "He knew," he said. "He commissioned this assay," she said. "He paid for it and received it, and then announced that the vein was dead." Webb was quiet. Outside, Sutter Flat went about its business. Somewhere on the main street, a freight wagon was being unloaded, and the sound of crates being stacked came in through the open window, along with the heat of the afternoon. Webb picked up one of the ore samples and turned it over in his hands. Galena has a specific brightness, a blue-gray metallic sheen under direct light that is unmistakable to a trained eye, and Webb had spent 9 years developing exactly that eye. "These samples are from the current face," he said. "Yes. The vein is still present at width." He set the sample down. He looked at the land transfer records. He did not say anything for a long moment, and when he did speak, it was with the careful flatness of a man who is deciding what to do with what he has just understood. "Miss Voss," he said, "I am going to need to keep these documents." She had brought copies. What happened next happened over months rather than days, and it happened through the machinery of the law rather than through any single dramatic moment, which is how genuine restitution most often works. Orrin Webb filed a petition with the Colorado Territorial Land Commission in September of 1887. Pruitt's attorney in Denver responded in October with a motion to dismiss on grounds of the statute of limitations. The commission denied the motion in December on the basis that the fraud had been actively concealed, which told the limitations period. In February of 1888, the commission appointed a special examiner to assess the Antler mine's face condition. The special examiner's report confirmed everything May's samples had indicated. In April of 1888, the 14 mineral rights transfers were voided. The surviving claimants and their heirs were notified. The compensation process was not fast and was not satisfying in the way that revenge is satisfying, because it moved through appraisers and surveyors and clerks and title attorneys and produced, in the end, not a dramatic scene, but a series of certified payments and a corrected deed registry that sat in a bound volume on a shelf in the Harlan County Land Office. Aldous Pruitt did not appear at any proceeding. He sent attorneys. He was, according to the Denver papers, which Webb sent to May in weekly bundles throughout the process, very dignified about it. His denials were measured and his language was impeccable. He became, in the end, irrelevant, because the thing that undid him was not an accusation, but a document, and a document does not need anyone's permission to mean what it says. Cyrus Boone's brother, who had died in 1879 and could not receive compensation himself, had left 2 children, a son named Albert, who worked a dry goods supply route out of Pueblo, and a daughter named Iris, who had married a schoolteacher in Telluride. May wrote to both of them in September of 1887, before the formal process had begun, because she thought they had a right to know what she had found and what she intended to do with it. She told them what the claim had been worth. She told them what it had been sold for. She told them about the oilskin package in the face of the shaft. She told them about her father. Iris wrote back within the week. Her letter was short. She wrote that her father had always believed something was wrong about that sale, but had no means to prove it, and that he would have been glad to know there was a record. She did not say anything about the money. She closed by asking May to please thank whoever kept the record. May read that sentence 3 times, sitting at the table in her room in Sutter Flat, where she had been staying at the boarding house of a widow named Porter since the beginning of her work there. Outside, the San Juans were going into their autumn colors. The aspen stands above the valley, turning from green to a gold so bright it seemed to emit its own light. She had the oilskin in front of her, and the carbide lamp beside it, and the tap hammer. Her father had given her the summer she turned 14, and that she had carried in her satchel every day since. She thought about her father at the bottom of a shaft in October of 1865, an honest man in a dishonest situation, leaving a record in the only place left to leave it. She thought about what it costs to do that, to commit an act of precision and integrity that no one may ever benefit from, in a cavity in the rock 60 feet below the surface, and cover it with a stone and climb back up into the light. He had not known she would be the one to find it. He could not have known. She had been 5 years old in 1865, and had been in Ohio with her mother, far from Colorado, far from a played-out silver mine in the San Juans, far from a landscape that would not become hers for another 22 years. There are things that wait, not because someone commands them to wait, but because the rock is patient, and the paper inside the oilskin does not change with the years, and the truth is not a perishable thing. If you have a story like this in your family, someone who kept a record that should have been kept, someone who told the truth in a place where it cost them something, tell us in the comments. This kind of integrity deserves to be named. And if you want to hear another story of what a woman's patience can find inside a thing the world decided to forget, stay where you are. She left Sutter Flat in November of 1887 after the commission petition had been filed and the process was in motion. She did not stay to see it resolved, because there was nothing more that her presence could add, and because she had other work. She had by then received an inquiry from a mining company in Nevada that had heard of her assessment work through Orrin Webb. The inquiry was respectful. She answered it. She stopped on the way out to say goodbye to Cyrus Boone, who was still in the valley. He was sitting on the steps of the hardware store when she came by. He shook her hand with the particular formality of a man who has been raised to believe that certain debts cannot be named without diminishing them. She left the way she had come, on the ridge road south toward Durango, the red shawl bright against the gray rock of the mountain behind her, the satchel over her shoulder with the tap hammers nested inside it, the oilskin document packed with her papers for the commission's use, and her father's farewell assay folded in the interior pocket against her ribs. The shaft at the Antler mine was recolored and retimbered the following spring when the commission's appointed operator came to assess the secondary pocket. The work took 4 men 12 days. On the first morning before the new timbers were set, one of the crew lowered a carbide lamp to the bottom on a rope to check the air and see what they were working with. The lamp burned steady and clear at the bottom of the shaft. The ore face caught the light and gave it back as that particular blue-gray shine the record her father had left was gone in the hands of the commission doing the work it had always been meant to do. The shaft went back to being a shaft. Work is like that. It does not announce itself or hold a ceremony. It simply continues, patient and material, as it always has.